All right, so just welcome back. Just gonna have a little play with the cameras and see what looks good while I just compose myself. So I think the way I'll do it this week is when I'm coding, we'll go with that. That looks pretty good. And then if I'm explaining stuff, we'll go with this and we'll maybe mix it up with a little bit of this. So this week we're going to do content negotiation. So the contents are going to be this. So first of all, we'll have a little chat about what content negotiation actually is. Sounds a bit highbrow, but really it's not at all. Hey, Godwin. And then we'll look over accept headers, and then we'll see how they play their part in content negotiation. Then we're going to add middleware because we're going to figure this out with middleware. So all the functionality is going to be done with middleware and some supporting bits and pieces. And we'll talk about how middleware works, or more to the point, how middleware works in the framework which we are using here, which is a Slim framework. As we discussed last week, the reason why we're using the Slim framework is because it's just really lightweight and minimal and stays out of our way and helps us stay focused on the stuff that we really want to learn about, and that is about APIs and REST. And then we're going to create our own content type middleware, and that is going to depend on a backed enum to help it make decisions. And then once we've made a massive mess, we're going to refactor it all behind an interface. And so it's going to be pretty cool. You'll learn a lot of cool stuff in this one. Last week was it was my first stream, so I didn't want to do anything too difficult. This one we're going to level up a little bit, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So what is content negotiation? To explain this, let's just rewind to where we finished last week. And what am I there? Let's find. Here we go. Excuse my technical lack of expertise with the streaming software. So you might notice, by the way, that the bird has gone from the right hand corner. So I've paid for like premium. So it cost me $400 to get rid of that bird. So you are welcome. Anyway, back to the subject. So if you remember last week when we finished, we said we weren't really happy with this. We were setting the content type header on every single operation for every single endpoint. But not only that, this has absolutely no flexibility in the system. We're sort of hard coding the content type. What we can do is we can read the accept header on the request, and we're going to set it up so our application is capable of serving maybe 3 or 4 different formats. And so we're going to look at the accept header on the request, see if it's one of the formats that we support. And if it is, we'll send it back in the format that the client wants. If it's not, what we will do is we'll default to JSON or something along those lines. And so if we go to Postman now, let me show you some other things here. And am I in a good place there? Is that any good? That's all right. Okay, so when we send requests, we can send request headers. Yeah, and this is the accept header that we're talking about. So the client will send this accept header, but as well as the format, there are all these other accept headers. So if I start typing accept, you can see we've got accept language, accept encoding, accept char set. So all these different variables. For example, if you want looking at a website, or if we're serving content to a website and the client has asked for it in a different language, French, Swahili, whatever, if we support that language, then it should be good that we can read that and actually send the content back in the language that the client wants. And so the way that our application figures this out, or the name which is given to the way that our application figures all of this out and what representation to send back, is called content negotiation. So we're figuring out what the representation should look like for that particular response based on what the client has asked for. Can we give them what they want? If not, what can we give them, which is the next best thing? All right, so I'm going to show you something else. Now here, what we've done, we've just got one accept header. And so we send that, and then remember we hard coded it and it's coming back in JSON. But in reality, a client can ask for more. They can ask for a comma separated list of different formats. So we're just going to nip over to Chrome, and this is the documentation for the Slim framework. I've opened the console up here, I've sent a request, and we are looking at the request headers here. And so here is the accept header of the request. And as you can see, we have this big list and it's all comma separated. And the way that this works is if the ones which come first tend to be the preferred choice. And so we're asking for when you browsers, they typically send like a list which is always the same, and their preference is text HTML, followed by application XHTML, followed by application XML. And so you'll notice this semicolon Q equals 0.9. What the Q means is, or what it stands for, is quality factor. That's a rubbish name. What that actually means is like preference. So if we don't give it a quality factor, then it has a preference of 1 and it can't go higher than 1, so that is the highest. And then you'll notice that these values are descending. Can I have XML? All right, you don't have that. Okay, then give us this one with a Q of 8. Okay, give us this one with a Q of 0.7. So you're hoping that you get your first choice, and then it will sort of figure out what it can actually give you based on what you've asked for and what it's able to serve. And so, like I say, the way that we're going to figure all of this out is using middleware. So let's go over to our application now. Am I in a good place there? I'll jump off screen for a second. I've already set up a middleware registrar, very minimal setup here just to get us going. And what this middleware registrar does, it's in source HTTP middleware registrar. It registers the middleware in a particular order, and order is important. And so what we're doing here is when the application bootstraps, the register method is called on the middleware registrar, and then the custom middleware, that's a middleware which we are going to create, that gets called first, and then the default middleware, so that is middleware which has to exist in order for this application to work correctly. So we just leave those and we don't touch those. And then it will call the add error middleware. So the add error middleware, we're not going to really discuss that, but we've got a big section coming up on error handling, and error middleware will play a big part of that, and we'll be revisiting middleware when we come to that. But for what we're doing today, we're going to register a custom middleware. Now, like I say, order is important. Let's go back to the Slim documentation. So on the left of the screen, this is the order in which the middleware is executed. So your application will receive a request, and that will be routed, and it will go into the first middleware. That will handle it. It will then pass it on to the next middleware in the stack, if there is a next middleware in the stack. And when it runs out of middleware, it will give it to what is ultimately the request handler, the eventual request handler, which in our case, that eventual request handler, just jump back on screen now, that eventual request handler is the method on our controller. So if we go to our flights controller, let's have a look. So yeah, this is what will eventually handle the request. As you can see, we have our show method. It will take that request. Its only responsibility is to figure out how to send back a response. And so that will send the response back. And guess what happens then? The request or the response then goes back through the middleware out the way it came in. So this is like a first in, last out kind of setup. So the middleware which passed that request to the controller, to that method, then receives that response and passes that response out the same way that it came in. So yeah, last in, first out, or first in, last out. I think they're the same things. If they are, put a comment in and let me know that I'm right or wrong. Let's jump back to the code. So where were we? What we want to do here now is we want to create our own middleware. So we're going to register it first. The way that you register middleware, or the way that you add middleware, is you say app, and on app it has an add method, and that add method is for adding PSR compliant middleware interfaces, or classes which implement the middleware interface. So we'll say new, and we shall call this. We're just going to focus on content type today. Yeah, we're not going to do content language or encoding. We're just going to do content type. So for that reason, we are going to call this content type middleware. Okay, so no surprises as to what it does. Let's then actually go and create that. So we're inside of the source folder, HTTP middleware. I think all of our middleware related to content negotiation, we shall actually put that in its own folder. We'll have a content negotiation folder. So let's go and create that. So content negotiation. And then inside of there, this is where we'll create the class. Don't know if you can hear the rain. Basically, my office is in a wooden box with a flat roof, and I live just south of Manchester, and it rains for like first 3 months of every year. So if you do hear rain, sorry about that. Hopefully it won't sound too loud. It doesn't seem too heavy at the moment. Famous last words. Okay, so we've got our content type middleware here. And this needs to implement an interface, a PSR interface called middleware interface. And this just has one method on it. So this is PSR 15. Go and look that up in your own time after this. Really cool PSR, actually. It's nicely thought out. We need to add the method stubs. It has one method called process. Okay, and what this does is it will take a request. So this, ignore the big long name here. Basically what that means is that's our request as far as you're concerned. We have a request handler and it will return a response. Very important that it returns a response. And so what this will do, it will take the request. If you remember back to the diagram I showed you on middleware, it will take that request, do whatever it needs to do with that request, and then pass it to the request handler. And that request handler will say, okay, do I have more middleware where I can pass this? If it does have more middleware where it can pass this, then what it will do is it will pass it to the next middleware in the stack. If there's no more middleware, that request gets passed into the ultimate request handler, which is the method on the controller. So before we go any further, just going to make these names a bit nicer. Let's use some aliases. Request server request interface as request handler interface as request handler. So the solution that I'm going to show you today, actually, while I'm just doing this, I posted out like a first draft, more like a RFC kind of graphic on socials the other day, and asked how would you improve this, and I had a couple of good suggestions. And so what we're going to do today is, I mean, the first one that I sent out, it was fairly simplistic, naively simplistic, to be honest. So what we're going to do today is a little bit more complex, but pretty much will give you the same result. Okay, request handler response. Happy with that. Let's mark out the steps. So I do this quite a lot. There's going to be 3 steps here, isn't there? I'll do this, and then it just keeps me on track. And without having, I don't like to code and think at the same time. I like to think and then code. And this kind of helps me do that. You can always tell developers who code and think at the same time because they just create a complete mess and multiple checks of the same things and stuff like that. First thing we need to do is do whatever we want to do with a request. Okay, do what we want to do with the request. In our case, what we want to do is check the accept header and then see if we can support the format that the client is asking for. And if we do, what we will do is we'll set an attribute on that request. And so that information can be passed in to the request handler, because if you remember, we are going to need that information inside what will be the ultimate request handler, this show method, because it needs to know what format to serialize those flights in. So we will set a attribute on the request, and then that information will be passed all the way along the chain. It'll be available to everyone. What do we want to do with a request? Okay, handle the request. This returns a response. Okay, and then last thing we want to do is return the response from here. But a little bit more importantly than that is, well, not more importantly, but before that happens, what do we want to do with the response? There's only one thing that we want to do with the response. We want to set, sorry, you can't see that, can you? What we want to do with the response is we want to set the content type header to whatever we can set it to. Okay, so let's start working on this first step. What we want to do with the request. We want to read the accept header. Okay, so we'll say accept equals request. And we have a method here called get header line. And so that will get us the header. And you know what? Before we go any further, let's just dump that out and make sure that we are seeing what we want to see. And yeah, let's fire this off. Fatal error. Okay. Class content type middleware not found. And that is because, let's go back to the middleware registrar. We'll just make sure that we are importing that. That was the problem there. Kaboom. Here we go. So preview, great stuff, application JSON. Now remember, we can have a comma separated list here, can't we? So let's replicate that, text, HTML. That looks good. All right, so we have a comma separated list. How do we handle a comma separated list in PHP? If we want to split that into an array, we use the explode function. So we'll say requested formats equals, just going to move my mouse out of the way, explode. The first argument is separator. In our case, that was a comma. The second argument is accept. And it's going to annoy you, but I'm going to dump this out again. So I tend to do this every step of the way. And I don't move on to the next step until I know the last one is working. That's good. So we have an array now, application JSON and text HTML. So this is the order of preference. So we're asking for application JSON as our first choice, text HTML as our second choice. Okay, so what we want to do here is first we need to establish what formats we're going to support in our application. So we're just going to support 4 different formats, and we want to loop over these requested formats. And the first one, which matches what we can support, the first one they ask for, which is one that we support, then we'll give it back to them. If we don't find a match, then we're just going to default to application JSON. So let's run a for each over this. Requested formats as requested format. Okay, now what? What we want to do is store our allow list somewhere. Now, in the past in PHP, that's what you would have done. You would have created an allow list and stored it as a content somewhere. And allow lists are okay. The problem I always had with them is, like, where do you put them? You'll tend to either see the same allow list replicated in multiple classes, or they'll just be attached to a really strange class, a really strange location. But we now have a problem for that, not a problem, a solution for that in PHP, and that is enums. And so we're going to use an enum here. And before we go any further, let's go and create that. So I'm going to keep that in the content negotiation folder. And let's create this, and we shall call this content type. That sounds like a good name. Content type. This will be an enum, and more specifically, this will be a backed enum. A backed enum is one which has a value, and the value can be one of 2 things. It can be either a string or it can be an int. So if I say, yeah, I want bools, then PHP Storm's going to complain. And if I for example, said, right, tell you what, we'll have ints and strings. You can't do that either. So you've got to make a hard decision here, a hard life choice. We're going to have strings because that's what we want, isn't it? So the way that you do the separate cases is like this. Case JSON equals application / JSON semicolon. So I could type all these out, but guess what? I've come prepared because I used to watch Blue Peter as a kid and I know how it's all done behind the scenes. Yeah. So we're going to drop that in there. That looks good. So we've got a choice of 4. JSON, HTML, XML, CSV. Perfect. Don't worry about the formats at the moment. We might use different formats later on. All we want to do is come up with a system that works. So what we want to do is make a check here. And what I'm going to try to do is make an assignment. So if we do have a requested format which matches, I'm going to store it on a variable called format. And the way I'm going to try to do that is by saying content type. And there's 2 ways of doing this. You can say from and pass in the value requested format. And what this will do is it will see, okay, do I have a case which matches this format? Do one of these things here match that? If so, great, and it will return an enum matched to that case. If not, it will throw a value error. So that's not really what we want. I don't want to throw a value error. And the reason why I don't want to throw a value error is because I know the default, which we're going to use if we can't find a match. So instead of throwing an error and creating a big mess to figure out how to solve, let's just use a different one, which is called try from. And what try from does, it's a bit more forgiving. Instead of throwing a value error, if it doesn't find a match, what it will do is it will just give you null. And so we can handle null, can't we? And so what's going to happen here is if it can do an assignment, if it does find something, format will be populated with a value. Otherwise, format will evaluate to null. And so if we find one, we're just going to break out of here. And so let's see what we get here. Yeah, let's just dump this out, sorry, and see what we've got so far. Hopefully, we should see application JSON. Okay, so we are getting a content type enum for JSON, the name of JSON, and the value of application JSON. How about if we said we want the format of Mickey Mouse? This is a new format which is really going to take off. It's the latest, greatest thing in software development. We get null. Okay, so we don't support Mickey Mouse yet because we're not cutting edge. So what we're going to do is we are just going to do a check on that. We're going to try and set the content type. So content type equals, we'll put this in parentheses. We'll say, do we have a format? If we don't have a format, we want content type JSON. And then ultimately what we want to call off that is value. So if we go and run this now, we've asked for Mickey Mouse. We don't support Mickey Mouse. We should see JSON. Let's give it a shot. We have an error. Process value type must be, I didn't dump anything out, that's why. Silly me. And just keep checking that I'm not blocking anything on the screen. I'm doing okay so far. Like a professional already. Application JSON. Perfect. Okay, so I hope you know how that worked. Quite a bit of code we wrote there. So it went through the formats. It said the client has asked for Mickey Mouse. It's gone through the formats each time saying, can I have Mickey Mouse? And the answer has been no. And so ultimately we've said, okay, you're getting JSON. Don't ask for silly formats anymore. And so that's what's happening. And then what we want to do now is we said we're going to store this on the request. So we know what our content type is. Final step here is to store it on the request. And the way you do that is you do this request with attributes. So if you want to add an attribute to that request, which is basically a variable which will travel with the request, then you do it like this. So content type, content type. Okay. And what has happened there? So this is very important. When we call with attribute, we have not created or updated a mutable property on that request. We're using PSR7. PSR7 is immutable. So what has actually happened is when we call that, it's created a brand new request instance. And on that instance, it has an attribute of content type. To make sure that we do, or to check that we do have a content type attribute, and you're probably thinking, this is such a tedious way to work, but it's just how I work. I'm going to say request get attribute content type, and hopefully we should dump out JSON there. Perfect. So that is working. Okay, and this is good. This solves our problem, doesn't it? However, there are going to be other developers with other problems, and what ones which are similar to ours. And so if you're the one that goes first on something like this, it's your responsibility to create the contract for those which follow you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a common interface for all the other different types of content negotiation. Because remember, we spoke about language, we spoke about encoding, we spoke about char sets, other things. Because what will happen is if we don't set that contract, the next developer will come along and say, oh, there's no contract, there's no set of rules, and they'll do what they think looks good. And then the next developer that comes along after them, they'll do the exact same thing. They'll say, oh, there's no contract, there's no set of rules. In fact, there's two different implementations here. So I'm just going to do my own implementation. And next thing what you have is 3 or 4 very different implementations of what are very similar problems. And that is what is known as crap code. So we're not going to have crap code. We're going to refactor this and put it behind an interface. And we're going to have a think about what we would like this to look like. So this section is going to be about refactoring. I'm going to show you how I do it. And you won't have seen this before because this is purely my invention. And I've never shared it. So you're witnessing a world exclusive here. Okay, so let's stick this here. So what I've done there is all the code that we've just worked on, I've just put it in between comments as like delimiters. And then I'm going to ask myself 3 questions. Okay, and once you know the answer to these 3 questions, you know exactly how to create the interface for this. Okay, question 1. What is this doing? Question 2. What are the inputs? Should we put some question marks on there? In Spain, I'd need an upside down question mark at the beginning. That's just bizarre. What are the outputs? Just then, I just had like this thought into my head. Is my microphone on? The microphone's on. Yes. Right, I've got some good comments there. We'll have a look at those in a bit. What are the outputs? If your questions are fairly technical, then I may not answer them while I'm doing this live, but I will definitely answer them at some point. Okay, what is this doing? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? So what is this doing from high level? What we've done is we've done content type negotiation, haven't we? Just like the format, but those other types are going to be language, encoding, etc. So what is that doing? You know, from a high level, what we're doing, well, we're sort of negotiating content, aren't we? So we're doing content negotiation. So content negotiation. Okay, what are the inputs? As far as I can see here, the only input, the only thing that we need any information from is the request. So we'll say the request. What are the outputs? And again, the only thing that we are outputting that is coming out of this is a request. So again, request goes there. And then you just take this and we say we're doing content negotiation. So whack the word interface on there, content negotiation interface. We only need one method on there, don't we? Let's call that negotiate. Negotiate. The only input that needs is a request. The only output that is putting out is a request. And so there you have your signature. So let's go and create that now. So in content negotiation, should we call it negotiator or negotiation? Doesn't really matter, does it? So this is going to be an interface. I'm going to call it content negotiator interface. Declare strict types, one method, negotiate. So this will be a server request interface. So make sure you're using that one. PSR HTTP message server request interface. Request. Same thing going out the back. Server request interface. And then we are good. So what we want to do here now is go and use this. So just under here, let's write what this will look like. A request is coming out of this equals, this will be a dependency which we inject in the constructor. So this, let's call it content negotiator. Content negotiator, negotiate. That will take the request also. All right, and so we're going to replace all of this code here with that one line, and that will do us. So before I go any further, actually, what I will do is we'll just fill in some blanks here. So the handler will handle the request, and that will send back a response equals handler handle request. We'll then have our response, and we're going to return that response. So what do we want to do with it? We want to set a header. I can do that all in one line. Return response. Remember what we said last week? If you were here last week, with header, we'll do a similar thing as with attribute, in that it will create a brand new instance of that response, except with this header on it. So content type request. I had a brain pause for a moment there. Get attribute, or with attribute, get attribute, yeah. Silly me. Get attribute, content type. Hope that makes sense. So we're grabbing the content type attribute of the request, and that will be the content type header on the response. Let's go and cut all of this out of here now. And we're going to go and create a class which will deal with this. So in content negotiation, new class, content type negotiator. Declare strict types. Implement our interface, content negotiator interface, one method, negotiate. And hopefully I should be able to just drop some code in there. We'll clear out some of this. And then return a request. And there we have just refactored our middleware. So we'll not celebrate just yet. Let's just make sure that we can dump this out. So we're going to need to inject this through the constructor. So we'll make this, I think we'll make this middleware read only, actually, because We don't have any mutable properties on here. There's absolutely no reason for this to be mutable whatsoever. So we'll say private, and what is this again? Content type negotiator, content type, we'll call it content negotiator. Okay, and then there should be one step and that left, and that is to go back to the middleware registrar and just inject that new content type negotiator. And I think we are done with that. Let's dump out the request and we'll see if we can get the attribute off it actually. But first, one step at a time, let's dump out that request, fire that off. Okay, we have a PSR 7 request. Let's see if that attribute's on there. Get attribute content type. Yes. Okay, perfect. We asked for Mickey Mouse. We got application JSON. That's working nicely. So this should run all the way through now, you know, and then we will be good. Let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. So we're seeing some flights. Those flights, they're sort of being pretty printed. So that is suggesting that we are seeing JSON, and our content type header is set as application JSON, so that the entire thing has worked there. Let's ask for Mickey Mouse and then text HTML. Now, normally I'd like test drive this entire thing, test-driven development, because it means less thinking for me and less balls to mentally juggle. But yeah, for a live stream, that might be a step too far, I think. So Mickey Mouse followed by text HTML, which means what? It means that we should actually get this back as text HTML this time. That's another tip. Before you fire something off, if you just have a think about and just say out loud what your expectation is, and if you get it correct, and if you know what that expectation is, it means you've got pretty good control over your code and you know what's going on. If you can't say out loud, or you can't make a good guess at what's going to happen, you've probably not got much control over it whatsoever. Let's fire this off. Okay, so this time the headers are text HTML, char set UTF-8. If you look at the body, as you can see, that's now not being pretty printed as JSON. It's just in text format. So this is working exactly how we wanted it to work. So let's get off. Let's, why are you doing that to me? So application JSON, let's finish on a high and we'll ask for application JSON. Perfect. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. I'll have a quick blast through some of the comments at the moment in case of more requests. In case of more requested formats in format variable, I have only the last. All right, good question, Vittorio. I'll answer that. What you will get, we'll go back. So where do we put this content type negotiator? So Vittorio's asking the question, what will format give you here? So basically, in case that wasn't clear, we're looping through the requested formats. So the requested formats are in the order, the preferred order of the client. So if the client wants text HTML as their first choice, we're looping over them and we're saying, okay, can I have text HTML? Is that something you support? If it is supported, what it will do is try from, will store that requested format in the format variable, and then this condition is then evaluating to true because we have been able to make that assignment. And in that case, what we're going to do, because that's evaluated to true, is we are just going to break out of there, and format is holding the value of the requested format. If we're not able to make that assignment, i.e. try from is not returning us one of those choices, it's evaluating to null, then what will happen is format is null, and then we can sort of check against it. Okay, do we have a value for format? We don't have a value for format, so we are just going to give a default value of JSON. Okay, good question, great question. Right, let's hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you've learned something. I've enjoyed it. It was what I did. The way I worked with this is I came up with something like over the weekend, a first rough draft. I didn't try and come up with like the final version, and I just stuck it on LinkedIn, stuck it on Twitter, stuck it in the PHP developers group on LinkedIn, where you'll always get decent feedback from experienced developers. Got back some good suggestions there of how it could be improved. Made it a little bit more realistic, and so we ended up at this. So don't be afraid of showing your code in public. Put your ego to one side and just learn stuff. There will always be, every single line of code you ever write, there'll always be someone who can do it better. So yeah, don't be precious about your designs. All right, what else was I going to say? Honestly forgotten, but I do have stuff written down here. Okay, so let's just go over the course and the repo and the branch. Well, not the course, but someone did ask me how you get set up with all of this. So yeah, so like I explained last week, just come to GitHub, PHP API Pro. The branch that we worked on today, by the way, or the starting branch today, was pretty much where we left off last week. So that will be number 6, item endpoints. So if you want to have a go at this, what I've just done there, the branch is item endpoints. Getting set up is really easy. I'm just going to put my mic on mute while I cough. All right, that's better. Yeah, the setup is really easy. In fact, you don't even need the run composer install. You can just clone it. So come here, clone this, run docker compose up D, and then that will give you a starting setup with Nginx, web server, PHP, and MariaDB. And all of this will work perfectly with this because I create the images myself, and so these will be, I create the Docker images myself, so you'll be getting exactly what I'm using here. And if you do have any other questions regarding setup or anything, just ping me. If you're in my mailing list, then just mail me. You've got all the details and stuff. If you're not in the mailing list, make sure you join at Gary Clarke Tech. So everything I teach you is stuff that the industry wants you to know. And I know mailing lists are pretty boring and everything, but mine's pretty good, I think. No one ever leaves. And I give away like discounts and stuff on my courses, but also loads of other cool stuff and like lessons like solid principles and stuff like that. I cover mainly 6 skills, and I'll show you what those are. If we go to the notes, I call these the 6 essential skills, yeah? And these skills appear on every single PHP dev job spec. Because content creators typically, what a content creator will do is they'll try and teach you the stuff that's either going to make them the most money or get the most engagement. I just teach. What I do is I've done this ever since I started Gary Clarke Tech, and roughly every 6 months, and anyone in my mailing list will tell you this, every 6 months I grab a load of job specs of recruiters and I go through and I look, what are the skills which appear on every single one? And you know what? The answer, it hardly ever changes, or in fact, it never changes. And it's these 6 things here. So if you learn these 6 things here, you're going to put yourself way ahead of the rest of the pack. I mean, people contact me each week to say that what I've taught them has helped them find employment, help them find better jobs or find a job in what is described as a tough market. It's only a tough market if you've been learning the wrong stuff. These are things that you need to know. These are the things which you'll find on every single PHP job spec. Let's go down them. Good PHP skills. So the stuff like the PSRs, like the middleware we've just been doing, object-oriented programming, solid. Okay, framework experience. This is where some people kind of mess things up. So they'll go and learn every feature of React or every feature of Laravel or every feature of Symfony. You don't need to know every feature. Just learn how the framework works, from like sending requests and responses, learn about things like the event dispatch and stuff like that, and the kernel and just the core framework stuff. And then anything else that you need while you're building cool stuff, you can learn that as you go, but don't spend ages learning framework stuff just for the sake of it. You're wasting time. Good testing skills, absolutely essential. SQL, for PHP, most jobs will mention MySQL, but if you're a Postgres ninja, you're still gonna get a job where they use MySQL. APIs and REST, obviously, that's what we're doing now. So I'm going down the list and ticking these off. We've covered most of them. There's sort of two which are standouts, which I haven't covered, and that's what we're working on now. APIs and REST, and my next course will be about PHP and SQL, and then Git and GitHub. So I've got a free course on that. I've got full course on PHP object-oriented programming. We'll do some more PHP in the SQL course. We've got PHP Framework Pro, which shows you exactly how frameworks work. We've got 2 testing courses. So this is the stuff that you need to know. Okay, no excuses. If you're learning every feature of React or Laravel or Symfony before you've learned this stuff, you're just going to be competing with a bunch of other people for like average jobs with average salaries, and that. This is the stuff that you need to know. All right, next, what else I've shown you the branch, I've shown you the essential skills. One other thing, actually. So one of my students, Timothy, really cool little fella. What he's done is started his own blog, and he's published his first post this week. It's about named arguments in object-oriented programming. So I'll leave a link to this under the recording of this. Check it out. Really cool guy. He's got a nice writing style, really intelligent, and I think he's got a good future. He's got a few blogs lined up, and we're going to try and release one a week. So show him some support on that. That would be really cool. Okay, do we have any more questions? Are you good at coding? Please answer in the chat. I'd like to make a work suggestion. Okay. I don't think we have any more questions. I think we're all good there. All right. Thanks for joining. That's been cool. I'm now going to get ready because Liverpool are playing Chelsea in about an hour's time. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.